The Desperate Invitation. The massive crystal dome of Drakmore Station flickered as another wave of phase energy tore through its defensive shields. Ambassador Theron pressed his six-fingered hand against the observation window, watching the last remnants of the Seventh Fleet dissolve into nothing more than scattered particles drifting through space. The void wraiths moved like liquid shadow between the stars, their forms shifting from solid matter to pure energy as they consumed everything in their path. "How many more ships do we have?" Theron asked, though he already knew the answer would break what remained of his hope. General Kexvar, his insectoid features twitching with barely controlled panic, consulted his tactical display. 14 vessels remain operational across all Allied fleets. The Zenthari contributed their last 3 cruisers this morning. They lasted exactly 11 minutes. 11 minutes. Theron remembered when the Zenthari cruisers were considered the most advanced warships in the galaxy. Their quantum armor could withstand the heart of a star, and their weapons could crack planets. Against the void wraiths, they had proven as effective as throwing stones at a hurricane. The emergency council session continued around them, but the voices of the surviving species leaders had taken on the hollow tone of the defeated. The crystalline collective spoke of evacuating their core worlds. The Aquatic Federation was already pulling back to their deepest ocean planets. Even the warrior-proud Saber clans were discussing terms of surrender. "There has to be something we haven't tried," Theron insisted, his voice cutting through the despair. "In all the galaxy's archives, all our combined knowledge, there must be some weapon or strategy we've overlooked." Dr. Ylara, the expedition's chief xenorchaeologist, activated a holographic display that showed the spiral arm of their galaxy. Red zones marked territories now under void wraith control. The spreading pattern looked disturbingly like an infection. "I've been researching every species we've encountered in the past 1,000 years, looking for any technology or technique that might help." She manipulated the display, zooming in on a small yellow star near the galaxy's edge. "There's one species we never formally contacted. The archives list them as unsuitable for galactic integration due to their primitive technology and aggressive tendencies." General Kexvar's mandibles clicked dismissively. "If they're primitive, what could they possibly offer against an enemy that has defeated our most advanced civilizations?" "That's exactly what makes them interesting," Dr. Ylara replied. "Every species the void wraiths have conquered used similar military doctrines. Energy weapons, shield technology, conventional tactics. This species called humans developed along completely different lines." Theron studied the data flowing across the display. The planet Earth showed signs of recent industrial development, nuclear technology, and surprisingly extensive military conflicts. The assessment team that had observed them 50 years ago had noted their unusual approach to warfare, calling it chaotic but effective. "They fight each other constantly," Dr. Ylara continued. "Not for resources or territory expansion, like most species, but for abstract concepts. Freedom, justice, revenge. Their military history shows they've survived dozens of extinction-level conflicts and somehow become stronger each time." "Barbarians," General Kexvar muttered. "Perhaps," Theron agreed, "but barbarians who are still alive while our civilization dies around us." The decision to break the non-contact protocol took less than 5 minutes. With void wraith forces advancing on 3 more core worlds, desperation overruled diplomatic procedure. The emergency transmission was sent through quantum space toward the small blue planet that might hold their last hope. The response came back in 6 hours, impossibly fast for a species that supposedly hadn't developed faster than light communication. 3 words in broken galactic standard: "We are coming." Theron expected ships, maybe a small fleet if they were lucky. What materialized in Drakmore Station's docking bay 3 hours later was something else entirely. No ships, no transport signatures, no energy readings that their sensors could detect. Just 3 figures who seemed to step out of empty space itself. The first was a woman in dark military fatigues, her brown hair pulled back severely and her eyes the color of Arctic ice. She carried weapons that the station scanners couldn't identify and moved with the controlled grace of someone who had spent decades learning how to kill efficiently. Behind her, a massive man built like a mobile fortress wore armor covered in scars and dents. His friendly smile seemed completely out of place on someone who radiated such casual deadliness. The third was smaller, younger, but something in his quiet manner suggested he was the most dangerous of all. "Ambassador Theron?" the woman asked, her voice carrying an accent that the universal translators struggled to parse. "I'm Captain Elena Vasquez, Earth Special Operations Command. This is Sergeant Morrison and Lieutenant Sato. We understand you have a problem with some hostile aliens." The briefing room fell silent as the three humans studied the tactical displays showing void wraith movements across 17 star systems. General Kexvar had spent 2 hours explaining their enemy's capabilities, their adaptation methods, and the complete failure of every weapon system in the galactic arsenal. They phase shift between dimensions. General Kexvar concluded. Energy weapons pass through them harmlessly. Kinetic weapons can't achieve lock-on. They learn from every encounter and adapt their defenses accordingly. In 6 months, they've consumed 43 populated worlds and show no sign of slowing down. Captain Vasquez nodded thoughtfully. 43 worlds in 6 months. That's actually pretty slow by human standards. The casual comment sent ripples of shock through the assembled alien commanders. Sergeant Morrison, who had been quietly examining a captured void wraith weapon, looked up with interest. "Remember the Proxima incident? Whole system gone in 3 days." "Different situation," Lieutenant Sato said softly. His fingers danced across a portable device that was somehow interfacing with their most secure military networks. The Proxima colonies were dealing with self-replicating AI. This is more like the Titan War. Theron felt compelled to ask. What was the Titan War? The three humans exchanged glances that held entire conversations. Captain Vasquez finally answered. 18 months of fighting an enemy that could manipulate gravity, existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and adapted to every weapon we used against it. We lost 4 billion people before we figured out how to win. 4 billion people. The number was staggering. Theron's entire species numbered barely 2 billion individuals total. How did you survive such losses? We learned that sometimes the only way to defeat a superior enemy is to become something they can't understand, Sergeant Morrison said, his cheerful demeanor never wavering. The Titans were logical, efficient, and adaptable. So we became illogical, wasteful, and unpredictable. Lieutenant Sato was still working on his device, streams of data flowing across screens that hurt to look at directly. Your void wraiths follow similar patterns. They've been winning because they adapt faster than you can innovate. But adaptation requires prediction. If they can't predict your actions, they can't counter them. What are you suggesting? General Kexvar asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Captain Vasquez smiled, and for the first time since the war began, Theron felt something that might have been hope. We're suggesting you stop fighting them like civilized beings and start fighting them like humans. The planning session that followed violated every principle of military doctrine that the Galactic Defense Alliance had developed over millennia. The humans proposed strategies that seemed to border on insanity, using their own wounded ships as bait, deliberately weakening their defenses in key areas, and employing weapons that were technically war crimes under galactic law. This is madness, protested Admiral Zephyr of the Crystal Collective. You're asking us to sacrifice entire fleets based on psychological theories. Not sacrifice, Lieutenant Sato corrected. Invest. Every ship you lose will teach the Void Wraiths the wrong lessons. Every defeat will make them more confident and less careful. Humans learned long ago that sometimes you have to lose battles to win wars. Sergeant Morrison was examining the station's defensive systems with the enthusiasm of a child in a toy store. Your shields are too good, he announced, and your weapons are too efficient. The Void Wraiths have learned to counter perfection. They haven't learned to counter desperation. What exactly are you planning? Theron asked. Captain Vasquez activated a holographic display that showed their current position relative to the advancing Void Wraith forces. Operation Ghostbreaker. We're going to do something no military force in galactic history has ever attempted. We're going to deliberately lose a war in order to win it. The next 6 hours were a blur of activity as the three humans somehow convinced the Alliance commanders to implement strategies that seemed designed to ensure their complete destruction. Ships were repositioned into formations that offered no mutual support. Defensive systems were recalibrated to fail at specific moments. Most shocking of all, they began broadcasting detailed tactical information on open channels, practically inviting the Void Wraiths to intercept their communications. Trust us, Captain Vasquez said as the first wave of enemy forces appeared on long-range sensors. Humans have been fighting impossible wars for 300,000 years. We're really good at it by now. As alarms began sounding throughout Drakmore Station, Theron realized that either the humans were the salvation the galaxy desperately needed, or they were about to witness the most spectacular military disaster in recorded history. Watching Captain Vasquez calmly prepare for battle while humming what sounded like an ancient human war song, he found himself hoping desperately for the former. The Void Wraiths were coming, and for the first time in 6 months, the galaxy was about to fight back with weapons they had never faced before. Human ingenuity, human stubbornness, and the accumulated wisdom of a species that had turned warfare into an art form. The veterans show their worth. The first engagement began exactly as the humans had predicted. Void Wraith forces swept through the outer defense perimeter like a tide of living shadow, their forms shifting between matter and energy as they consumed everything in their path. Alliance ships exploded in brilliant displays of failure, their crews abandoning positions according to the carefully orchestrated retreat that Captain Vasquez had designed. From the command center of Drakmore Station, Ambassador Theron watched their forces disintegrate with growing horror. Every tactical display showed red indicators as ship after ship fell to the advancing enemy. In 30 minutes, they had lost more vessels than in the previous month combined. This is disaster, General Kexfart hissed, his insectoid features twitching with stress patterns. Your human strategies are accelerating our destruction. Captain Vasquez remained unnaturally calm, studying data streams that her portable equipment was somehow extracting from the chaos. Right on schedule, she announced. Lieutenant Sato, what's the enemy adaptation rate? The quiet human was interfaced with systems that Theron didn't recognize, his fingers dancing across controls that seemed to respond to thought rather than touch. Void Wraith tactical evolution proceeding within expected parameters. They're incorporating countermeasures for 17 different weapon systems simultaneously. Confidence indicators are spiking. Confidence is good, Sergeant Morrison said cheerfully. He was assembling what appeared to be a weapon from components that had materialized from nowhere. Confident enemies make predictable mistakes. Through the observation windows, Theron could see Void Wraith forces massing for what appeared to be the final assault. Their shadowy forms had grown larger and more solid, feeding on the energy of destroyed ships and gaining substance from their victories. They moved with the fluid grace of predators who had never encountered effective resistance. Now comes the interesting part, Captain Vasquez said. She activated a communication channel that reached every surviving ship in the Alliance fleet. All units, implement Protocol 7. What happened next violated everything Theron understood about space combat. Instead of retreating further or mounting a desperate last stand, the surviving Alliance ships began moving in patterns that made no tactical sense. They formed clusters that offered no mutual fire support, spread their formations too thin to concentrate firepower, and opened gaps in their defenses that practically invited enemy penetration. The Void Wraiths responded exactly as expected, flowing through the apparent weaknesses like water finding cracks in a dam. Their forms became more solid as they prepared to deliver the killing blow to what appeared to be a completely disorganized defense. Phase shift detected, Lieutenant Sato announced. Enemy forces transitioning to maximum solid density for final assault. Perfect, Captain Vasquez said. Sergeant Morrison, you may begin. The massive human grinned and pressed a single button on his improvised device. Boom, he said conversationally. The explosion that followed wasn't visible in conventional space. Instead, it manifested as a ripple of distortion that spread outward from seemingly empty coordinates between the fleet formations. The void wraiths, caught in their solid phase and bunched together in attack formation, found themselves trapped in a cascade of gravitational anomalies that Theron's sensors couldn't even classify. What did you do? Admiral Zephyr demanded, her crystalline form resonating with harmonics of shock. Turned their strength against them. Lieutenant Sato explained calmly. Void wraiths phase shift by manipulating local spacetime. We've been monitoring their energy signatures for the past 6 hours, learning their patterns. The mines Sergeant Morrison deployed don't explode in normal space. They create temporal paradoxes. Sergeant Morrison was already preparing a second device, his movements casual despite the cosmic forces being unleashed around them. Turns out when something tries to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously while caught in a time loop, physics gets cranky. Really cranky. The void wraith formations were unraveling as individual entities found themselves caught between dimensions, unable to shift phases or maintain coherent form. Their adaptive capabilities, so effective against conventional weapons, became liabilities when confronted with weapons that violated the basic assumptions of reality. But the humans weren't finished. All units, implement Operation Mindbender, Captain Vasquez commanded. The Alliance ships began broadcasting signals that made Theron's translation systems malfunction. The transmissions weren't communications in any conventional sense. They were something far more primitive and far more dangerous. Human war cries, battle songs, and psychological warfare techniques refined over millennia of conflict. The effect on the void wraiths was immediate and devastating. Beings that existed partially as energy found themselves contaminated by emotional frequencies they had never encountered. Their hive mind coordination, dependent on logical information exchange, began breaking down as human concepts of honor, rage, and defiance infected their network. Impossible, General Kexvar whispered. How can sound waves affect energy beings? They're not just sound waves, Lieutenant Sato explained. Humans learned long ago that consciousness itself can be weaponized. Every species the void wraiths conquered was logical, predictable. They've never encountered a species that fights with pure emotional determination. Through the tactical displays, Theron watched as void wraith forces began attacking each other, their coordination completely shattered by exposure to human psychological warfare. Entities that had swept across the galaxy with perfect unity were now fragmenting into confused individuals, each trying to process concepts like sacrifice, vengeance, and irrational hope. Captain Vasquez monitored the chaos with professional satisfaction. Phase 3. Sergeant Morrison, deploy the cultural contaminants. The big human activated another device, this one projecting holographic images throughout the battlefield. Theron recognized some of them from the archived files on human civilization. Scenes of humans fighting impossible odds, making last stands against superior forces, choosing death over surrender. The images weren't weapons in any conventional sense, but their effect on the void wraiths was more devastating than any kinetic bombardment. Beings that had existed as pure logic found themselves confronted with examples of irrational courage that their adaptive systems couldn't process or counter. Human military doctrine isn't just about weapons, Captain Vasquez explained as enemy forces continued their self-destruction. It's about ideas. The idea that some things are worth dying for. The idea that impossible odds just make victory more meaningful. The idea that being outnumbered is an opportunity, not a disadvantage. Individual void wraiths were now fleeing the battlefield, their collective consciousness completely shattered by exposure to concepts their species had never developed. Those that remained were caught in recursive loops, trying to adapt to strategies that changed based on pure emotion rather than logical progression. The cleanup phase will take about 6 hours, Lieutenant Sato announced, consulting readings that showed the complete collapse of Void Wraith coordination across the entire sector. Remaining enemy forces are experiencing cascading system failures. They'll either flee or self-destruct within the day. Ambassador Theron stared at the tactical displays showing the impossible victory. 6 months of desperate warfare had been resolved in less than 4 hours by 3 humans with equipment that shouldn't have existed and strategies that violated every principle of civilized combat. "How?" he asked. "How did you know this would work?" Captain Vasquez began disassembling her equipment with the same casual efficiency she had used to deploy it. "The Void Wraiths made the same mistake every enemy we faced makes. They assumed that because they were superior, they would win. But humans learned a long time ago that superior doesn't mean invincible." Sergeant Morrison was carefully packing away devices that had reshaped the battlefield. "Every species we've encountered fights to win. Humans fight to survive. There's a difference. When you're fighting to survive, you use whatever works, whether it's civilized or not. Your enemy was logical, adaptive, and efficient," Lieutenant Sato added. "All excellent qualities for conquest. Unfortunately, they never learned to fight something that was illogical, stubborn, and willing to break the universe if necessary." As the last Void Wraith signals faded from the sensors, Theron realized that the galaxy had just witnessed something unprecedented. Not just a military victory, but the introduction of an entirely new way of thinking about conflict itself. "What happens now?" General Kexvar asked. Captain Vasquez shouldered her gear and headed toward the docking bay where no ship was waiting. "Now you rebuild. The Void Wraiths won't be back. Word will spread through whatever network they use for communication. Earth is no longer a secret, and neither are human military capabilities. Will you stay? Help us prepare for other threats." The 3 humans exchanged another of their silent conversations. "Earth has its own problems to deal with," Captain Vasquez said finally. "But if you really need us, you know how to call." They walked toward the empty docking bay, and Theron hurried after them. "Wait, how do we contact you? What if another enemy emerges?" Captain Vasquez paused at the threshold. "Same way you contacted us this time. Send a message asking for help. Humans are really good at answering calls for help, especially when the odds are impossible. But how will you know we need you?" Lieutenant Sato smiled for the first time since arriving. "We'll know. Humans are also really good at knowing when someone needs help fighting a war they can't win." The 3 figures stepped into the empty docking bay and simply vanished, leaving no trace except the tactical displays showing a victory that would be studied by military historians for generations to come. In the weeks that followed, as the galaxy began rebuilding and incorporating hard-learned lessons about human warfare into their defensive doctrines, Ambassador Theron often found himself staring at the small yellow star on the edge of their spiral arm. Somewhere around that star was a species that had turned warfare into an art form, not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The Void Wraiths had been perfect predators, adapted to hunt civilized prey. They had never encountered humans who had spent millennia learning that sometimes the only way to preserve civilization was to temporarily abandon it. The galaxy was safer now, protected not just by shields and weapons, but by the knowledge that somewhere in the darkness, 3 veterans were ready to answer the call when impossible odds needed to be faced by someone too stubborn to lose.